Okay, so that's right, yeah, yeah. And then I broke you up into little groups and asked you to do some small calculations, and I think you all got that right. So there was a little bit left over of this whole topic, which I will do today. So that also relates to these properties of matrices, and this is called the Baker-Hausdorff formula. And it's very useful in many contexts. Okay, so basically it talks about functions of matrices. Okay, so for example, what is a function of a matrix A? Like, let's take this is a function of a matrix, right? And exactly how you would expect, I can write this as, right, just the same. Just if A was a number, what would you write? A power j by j factorial, right? This is the expansion for any e power x, right? E power x is sum over j 0 to infinity x power j by j factorial, right? Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
From here I can get a formula for sine of A. How will I get a formula for sine of A? Yeah, so if you just expand that and do that, you will get odd values will remain, whereas for cos okay. So I'll give you an example to do right away. You can actually work it out. Cos A minus 1, where minus I?
In the sine expression.
Okay. So let me give you an example with Dirac matrices. Do you remember the Dirac? Sorry, not the, you haven't done Dirac matrices yet. So I'll give you an example with Pauli matrices. Do you remember the Pauli matrices? No, yes, maybe. Okay, let me give you, doesn't matter. Sorry. These are something that you should never forget if you're going to be a physicist, okay? What are the properties of the Pauli matrices? Trace 0, then?
Eigenvalue plus minus 1.
Very nice. So what can you say about the squares of sigma I? Very nice. So this is all that you need to know. Very good. Now I want you to find, just checking that the board, yeah. Okay. I think it doesn't make sense for me to break you up into groups. 3 of you online are left to yourselves. Come, so please tell me what this is. So that the properties that we discussed, just use that and tell me what it is. There is no summation, okay? This is any one of the sigma matrices. If you have difficulty in choosing an arbitrary one, take a particular one, say sigma 3 or whatever, and do it. Okay. What did anyone get?
Cos theta plus I sigma k sin.
Very nice. So, what happens to the higher order terms? What happens to sigma k squared? All of those. So, sigma k squared will become 1, sigma k cubed will become sigma k, and so on, right? And so, you can resum the ones without the I will resum into cos theta, and the ones with the I will resum into sin theta, right? So, that just comes from these definitions. I hope these definitions are clear. Maybe you can try any one of them. Okay. Prove, show either two, it's your choice, using one. So let me write down 1, 2, 3. So just like convince yourself that this is true, and then at that point you can simply apply this here and be happy. So, right? Yeah. Just take 2 minutes, and I mean all you need to do is to substitute, right? I mean everybody knows that formula. Somebody told me, right? So sin theta is e to the I theta minus e to the minus I theta by 2I, and cos theta is e to the I theta plus e to the minus I theta by 2. So, okay.
Just write it as a complex number and use Euler's formula. You can directly use Euler's formula.
Yes, but then this is a matrix. I mean, it comes out the same. See, you just have to be a little careful. You're right, but you have to just be a little careful because this is a matrix. And if you have sign of AB, then you have to be careful whether AB commute or not. So there are little bit small complications over there, but that I will probably give you as homework, or I've been told that at the end of this month I have to give you exam. So maybe one of the exam problems I'll give you is e to the a, or maybe e to the IA, b, e to the minus IA, and you can tell me what this is. So I will ask you this in the exam for sure, okay, so that you will get your 5 marks or whatever. Why not? Idea is to learn something. Okay. So is this all right? Okay, I hope everybody, at least 3 people, got it right. Somebody said yes online. Ah, okay. Deep, okay. Good. Please try, everybody please try this out. You will see that only the odd ones survive here, for example in sine, because the odd ones survive, this will give you some odd power of I theta divided by I, so the i's cancel, and so your formula doesn't have an I in it, right? So please do check. Now the beautiful board is gone. You know, they clean the board but never the duster. So the duster brings back all the dust. Okay, so now we go to the trace formula. This is also, I think, something that you can work out on your own. So, determinant of okay. So for this I'll start you off with a hint. Is there a problem? Is it okay? Okay. I'll start you off with a hint. Let's say that A is invertible and can be inverted using some matrix, I don't know why I called it P, such that this transformation makes A diagonal. So D is diagonal. Okay. So you can start out with the left hand side, apply this. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Kripa. He's listening to the lectures, I think, more intently than you are. Okay. So is that a good enough hint? So what is e power a? So what will be the determinant? Now I've told you, sorry, I rubbed it off, the Baker-Hausdorff formula for e power a. So what is e power a? Sum over j equal to 0 to infinity. So please do that. Keep trying yourself. If you are stuck, you can look at the board. If D is diagonal, what are its elements? Eigenvalues of? Very nice. Okay, so what do I get here? So I'll just call it lambda I. What is D squared? How do you square a diagonal matrix? Very nice. So this is so I'm continuing here. Now I'm writing a matrix. Did everyone get this up till here? So what is this? What is that? So e to the power of? Right? This is e power lambda 1, e power lambda 2, e power lambda 3 up to e power lambda n, which is just e power d, right? Now please take the determinant and prove this. Now you are coming to trivial path, right? So what do you know about determinant of product, determinant of AB equals determinant of A into determinant of B, yeah. So now I think I have given you enough hints, complete this. So get the right hand side. How would you prove this, by the way? Very nice. So determinant of P inverse P is determinant of identity, whereas you can also write it as determinant of P into determinant of P inverse, and so they are all the same thing. Okay, so this is the famous trace formula. It's a very useful thing. Everyone got it right? Online people? Okay, very nice. So
Does it also work when A is not? Does it also work when A is not fully diagnosed?
it has to have an inverse.
It has to work.
No, it need not be fully diagonalizable. It can be block diagonal, but it should have an inverse. See, the block diagonal only means repeated eigenvalues. So that's okay. I should be able to get an inverse for A. That is the main thing, because that's what I have used here. No, you saw I wrote A P inverse AP as D, and then therefore I wrote A as PD P inverse, right? That A inverse must exist. That is the most important thing. ஏதாவது பிரச்சனை இருக்குதா கிருபா? Huh? Oh, oh, then they can't see what I am doing.
It only cut out at the end.
Okay. Okay. Now, yeah.
You said that at the end that A should have an inverse.
Yes.
This won't work. How?
Because we wrote, I don't remember which order, no? PA, P inverse is D, and then we wrote A is P inverse dP. Okay. Now what happens is that if I am not able to diagonalize A and I am not able to find such a P, then I cannot write this transformation. And if I cannot diagonalize it this way, it means that it does not have an inverse. What does it mean? You remember the whole procedure of diagonalizing a matrix involved finding the inverse, right? All those Gauss Jordan elimination, whatever we did, right? All that involved finding the inverse, right? So I should be able to find that, otherwise I will not be able to diagonalize the matrix. If that matrix is not invertible, I will not. So in fact, the determinant must be non-zero, then only it's not, then only it's invertible. All those things are there, okay? So I must have an invertible A, otherwise this will not work, okay?
Suppose I have a matrix with
Yes.
then this matrix is shouldn't be.
Yeah, because determinant.
But I can write the 0 in 0, then 1 in diagonal from like if 1 eigenvalue is 0, then another eigenvalue is 1, then I can put the 0 in the top diagonal. Diagonalize the matrix, but the matrix doesn't have a inverse.
As I said, it need not be fully diagonalizable, but I should be able to get it into Jordan canonical form. So what you are saying is that it's block diagonalizable, right?
No, he's saying that what if it is diagonalizable, but one of the diagonal elements is 0?
Suppose I have a 3 eigenvalue.
Okay.
One of them is 0.
So it's like lambda 1, lambda 2, 0.
One element is one eigenvalue.
Okay. Okay.
Lambda 1, lambda 2, 0.
Huh.
Okay. Then this is the diagonal form.
This is the diagonal form, yes.
But we know that the determinant of a matrix is the product of the eigenvalue.
Is 0, yes. Determinant is 0, yes.
If determinant doesn't exist, we cannot able to
It cannot invert it, yes. That is true.
matrix diagonalizable but not exist the inverse.
No, but that, see, that's the whole point. See, there are two things here now. I think maybe what I said also was wrong. See, this, I get it by diagonalizing this, right? Right now I have done P inverse is equal to diagonal, and P inverse should both exist. So for example, if A is Hermitian, P is unitary, all those things we have. So only P inverse should exist. Actually it doesn't say anything about A inverse, so I think I was wrong over there. So if there is a 0 eigenvalue, then of course the inverse will not exist. That is true. Yes, I think the matrix can still be diagonalized provided P inverse exists. I think, sorry, that is my mistake. P inverse. So P should be such that P inverse should exist. That's all. So I think that it is not the property of A but the property of P, and that is my mistake. You're right. Okay. Yeah. So A itself may not be diagonalizable. A may not be invertible, but it will.
Property that the matrix can be diagonal is the property that we have enough eigenvector such that we can diagonalize the matrix.
Yes.
0, then if we have a repeated eigenvalue, if we find the eigenvector are independent but suppose degenerate eigenspace, then
Yes.
we can diagonalize the matrix. Same eigenvalue but different eigenvector.
No, that again depends. No, you may not always be able to do it. Yeah.
If you find that
Yeah, so it may not exist. So the thing is this, just by having repeated eigenvalues doesn't mean that you cannot find the eigenvalues. That is, if you have an n-dimensional matrix, you should be able to find n eigenvectors which are orthogonal to each other, right? Now if the repeated eigenvalues are there, you may or may not be able to find that. Okay, so the thing is, if you can find it, then you know that actually that is the transformation, right? P is actually the collection of those eigenvectors. I mean that's what we had called gamma. I mean, so sorry, I have not had consistent notation across everything. So that is what we called gamma. So for gamma to exist, actually, I should actually be able to find all the sets of eigenvalues. So I think that somewhere there it comes in the property of P. But as I said, it's not always that you cannot find. Even if the eigenvalues are repeated, that's why we took 2 examples in the last class, right? One where the eigenvalues were repeated and still we found 3, it was a 3 by 3 matrix. We found 3 eigenvectors, and one where the eigenvectors were repeated, eigenvalues were repeated, but we could not find 3 independent eigenvectors. So that just depends on the nature of the problem. It will depend on the matrix itself, right? Because the eigenvectors will depend on the matrix itself. So it depends on that. So I think the correct statement to make is that there should be a P which exists with a P inverse such that it can make A diagonal. And if I can do that, then of course all this will follow. If I cannot do that, then of course this whole, not only the proof fails, but I think that is a necessary condition. Otherwise I cannot prove this, okay? Yeah, sorry, that was my mistake, okay? So I think one more property was there. These are just like odds and ends of properties. Yeah. So this is just to say that this trace formula is actually a special case of something we already saw, and that is, it's a special case of the spectral decomposition that we saw already. You remember when we defined Dirac's bracket notation, right? So decomposition. Now I have to keep looking at the board and make sure that it is. Let me make a few remarks of infinite dimensional later, but everything here is finite dimensional, okay? So the statement is this. So the spectral decomposition law, which says if I have some this is again we are talking about the Baker-Hausdorff formula was about functions of matrices, right. So, if I have a function of a matrix A, okay, so I can write it as where lambda I are the eigenvalues of A with respect to these eigenvectors. Sorry, I think it was called Vi. I think they were called Vi, the eigenvectors. Let me keep it as Vi. Okay, and this notation you have seen already. Okay. And the conditions are that A is Hermitian and this is very important, the second one, that is what we will use in the proof, it is infinitely differentiable. So, how do we see this? Let us start with so f of A we want to show is f of lambda I Vi, okay. So, let us write the eigenvalue equation. A acting on Vi is lambda I acting on Vi, right. So, if I write some jth power of the A matrix, what will I get? I can write this as A times A times A j times. The first A acting on Vi will give you lambda I. So, you can see that lambda I power j Vi, which means that Vi are the they can still see it, simultaneous eigenvectors of A and A power j. Trivial but true, right. So, what is f of A now? Now, I can use this notion of infinitely differentiable. So, f of, sorry, this is not clear, f of A, I can do a Taylor expansion, sorry, very nice, yeah. So, f of A at A equal to 0 plus f prime A, this is simply formal, right, at A equal to 0 times A plus, maybe I will write one more term, A squared f double prime A at A equal to 0 by 2 factorial plus etc. Now, I multiply this by multiply this by the ket Vi. And let me simplify my notation, let me write f of A at A equal to 0 as simply f of 0 V of I plus A f prime of 0 Vi plus A squared by 2 factorial f double prime 0. Now, what can you say? This is a number, right, these are functions, so these are all numbers, right. Very nice. So, this is f of 0 Vi plus f prime 0 lambda I Vi plus f double prime 0 by 2 factorial lambda I squared Vi. Now, can you see the answer? Very nice. This is f of lambda I. Can everyone see this? Exactly. The same thing now with lambda. Yeah. This is completely formal. Okay. So, you can define you can sorry of the function. So, for example, it depends on what the matrix contains. Correct. That is what you remember that whole phi and the dual space. So, I have phi is some function of some x and your x were the original spaces and your phi was a dual space, right. So, this is some linear function acting on the space of the vector space which is spanned by x or ei or whatever. So, same thing now A's are my elements of my vector space and F's are the functions which act on that vector space, and that function is defined in terms of some, I don't know, it could be some polynomial in A, it could be some exponential in A. For example, e power A is a function of A, right? So maybe f of A is simply e power A. Then in that case, f prime of A will be e power A, right?
F of A and F prime of A would also be matrices.
Yes, 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 absolutely will be matrices.
Is that f of 0 in f of when we write f of 0 in this case, since f the domain of f was the space of these matrices
Yes.
that A belong to, 0 is actually a 0 matrix,
Yes.
but we're pulling lambda into it and saying that now f acts on lambda where lambda is not a matrix anymore.
No, that is not true. See, because when you are doing that, you see that the function that you have is a number. F is a number.
F is the result of f is a number.
Yes.
But the domain of f is no longer a number.
Domain of F is not a number, but what are you doing here?
Lambda, so when we write f of 0 or f prime of 0 or whatever,
Yes,
any nth derivative of f whenever we write,
yes,
the domain of this nth derivative, since f is infinitely differentiable, is again going to be a matrix.
absolutely.
So the zeros that we're writing are 0 matrices.
Yes.
But finally, when we write lambda is a numbers.
Yes, that is true, but that is the definition of f of lambda, right? F of lambda still contains f of 0. It still see, because again that's all it is, right? See, this functional form has not changed. F of lambda is simply a notation for this line. I have not done anything more than that, right? Look at it. What does f of lambda mean? There is no meaning for f of lambda, because f acts on the domain of A, whereas lambda is a number. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So this is simply a notation. So I hope no one is confused, right? So f is defined on A. What does f of lambda mean? Lambda is not a matrix, right? But it simply means this. So you should not interpret it further than this. It simply means take f of A at 0, A equal to 0, and multiply it and then take f prime of A at A equal to 0, multiply it with lambda. Take f double prime of A at A equal to 0, multiply it with lambda squared. That gives you f of lambda. It's simply notation, right? It is a functional form.
A is a matrix, so A equals to 0 means all the elements are 0.
Yes, yes. Yes, that's what it is. So we don't know what the functional form is. This is always true, right? Right? When you expand in Taylor expansion, what do you do, right? F of x, or just f of x, right?
There is actually a very subtle reason why we can write this,
Huh.
and that is in the statement of the Baker-Hausdorff formula. The Baker-Hausdorff formula applies to perfectly analytic functions. I mean,
Yes, absolutely, yeah. You can see that, no? Here.
functions, and it says that even if your argument is a matrix, you can change it to a number. Apply
Yes.
the same function to a number.
Yes.
It's not just notation. You are
Yes.
literally changing the function.
Yes, but that is the answer for the thing, no? See, okay, maybe I think
You are literally changing the function. So
I-
instead of applying exponential to a matrix, you are now applying exponential to a number.
yes, but that is because the result of that functional
Yeah, that's the
that result of that function is absolutely a number, right? That is the whole point. That is why I am able to do this. Okay?
It's a very weird thing. Like
Yeah.
The proof actually relies on the fact
Yes.
that when you write f of 0
Yes.
or f prime f and a derivative of
Correct.
0,
Yes,
you are in such a small space around the origin of that matrix space
correct.
that you can treat it like a real number space.
Actually, that is not true. That is why you want infinite differentiability, right? If you are so close to 0, I can truncate at the third derivative and say that I only need it to be, having first 4 derivatives or something like that. But I can be infinitely far away from A equal to 0.
The problem is no matter how close you are to 0,
Huh.
you're still infinitely far away.
Of course, that is true.
That's why this requires to be
That is true, yeah.
When you put the 0 in A, so every time there will be no 0. You said that all elements will be 0. If you consider the
This
function
f of 0 stands for this, right?
when you consider the function cos A, then at A equals to 0, it will have 1.
Yes, so it can be, the f of 0 need not be 0, it can be anything.
Notation only.
It is notation only, yes.
Scalar and a quantity.
Correct, yes. It's in the function space. So it can be some number, right? That's the whole point. Right?
cos of a matrix. Even if you write cos of a 0 matrix, the answer will be a matrix.
No, but it depends on the function. No,
If you write
if you write cos of a matrix, but look at this, right? The left hand side is a function of A, right? and it gives you a number. The right hand side is a number, right? Yeah, so but this is equally good a function, right? This can be your function f of a, right? See, we haven't told what is f. F is a function. It acts on the space of A matrices. The output it gives depends on what that function is. If it's a function, if it's a polynomial, then it will only give you a number. If it's a complex function, it will give you a complex number. If it's also a matrix form, it will give you a matrix. We have not specified what it is.
Could it be that it takes a matrix and give out a real number like that?
Yeah, sure. It can, because this is, for example, a perfectly good f of a, right?
It will not be infinitely differentiable unless your matrix elements themselves are exponentials.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily, but it can be. Yes, you can have complications of that kind. You can have complications of that kind, but I think that if it helps you to look at this as simply a number, then you can think of f as a number, okay? But f is in the function space, right? So depending on what is the definition of f, we have not defined what is f, right? Depending on what is f, you get the output of f and it will be in that space. That is exactly your dual space. We don't know what it is. It is a well defined space. It's also a vector space. But it could be the set of polynomials, for example. It could be the set of anything, I mean. But it is a space, it is a vector space. Okay, and so this is simply notation over here. We have not done anything more than that. Okay, but this is a very good example because in fact you can rewrite this in this context. That is why. It is actually just a special case of this. So in fact we are almost done. Why don't we complete this? So we have got up till here. So what do we have to do? We have to get this, right? So we have got here, we have got, let me write it again, we have got f of a vi is equal to f of lambda I vi, right? This is what we have got. I have just simply written this equation again here. How do I get this equation from here? Very nice. So please use the completeness and get the answer. So what do I have to do? Use completeness. So I can do, what do I have to do? I have to multiply Vi and then right multiply with the bra Vi and sum over all I, right? So I have to do the same thing on the right hand side. Sorry, f of lambda I. So I have to right multiply by Vi bra and sum over all I. Now you can see f of a is independent of these Vi's. So sum over I Vi equals 1. That is the completeness. So the left hand side is f of a and the right hand side is exactly what we wanted to prove. Is it okay? Yeah.
In the very first statement,
This one.
it is clear that
Yeah.
f of a would be a matrix.
Yes.
This is for given, no ma'am? F of a would be a matrix because on the right hand side we have a matrix. In the very first line.
This one.
This one, yes.
No, it doesn't mean that it's a matrix, right? He doesn't even say so. I mean,
Ket vi, bra vi, won't it be a matrix necessarily?
no, this is the basis set. This is, if you remember, your projection matrix, which forms a complete set in terms of which I can expand it, right? And the coefficients of that are simply the f of lambda I, that's all. So whatever f may be, I am writing it in terms of a basis. Now since f is a vector in the dual vector space, I should be able to write it as any vector in any vector space. I can write as x is equal to sum over I xi ei, right? This is what I mean. So this f of lambda is simply the components of f in this basis, that's all. It doesn't mean anything more than that.
Basis itself is a matrix.
That is just your representation. Doesn't mean that it is a matrix, right? It simply spans the vector space. It is just a convenience, right?
The vector space after matrix.
Yeah, for example, I can even write this in terms of this, right? This writing in the spectral decomposition, this general spectral decomposition has nothing to do with matrices, right? I can write spectral decomposition for anything. For example, I can take psi star psi and write it, no? Where psi's are just complex numbers, right? They are not matrices. So it doesn't mean that this is a matrix. It just spans the entire space. Now that is your choice. You can have any basis to span that vector space, right? Is it clear? If I have physical 3-dimensional space, then I can use x, y, z unit vectors to span that space. But once I go away from that into some abstract vector space, that basis set is my choice. Right? I mean, convenience set will be eigenvectors, that is what we have written. These are the eigenvectors of that A matrix which is part of that vector space, and we have chosen to expand it in terms of A. Suppose I have a matrix B and it has eigenvectors say Bi instead of Vi, I can also do a spectral decomposition in terms of those eigenvectors, right? Because that is what my spectral decomposition tells me, that I can write some, I have some matrix or some operator, it does not matter what it is, and I have a space which is spanned by these eigenvectors, and then any function I can write in terms of the spectral decomposition law. It does not mean that it is only a matrix.
No, no, I'm saying this because ma'am, in the previous class we had let this bracket notation used for the columns and row.
Yes, that is what I am saying. You can use it that way, but you do not have to use it that way. I am saying.
That is the only way.
Yeah, that is what I am saying. So, but so. Sure, add. By the way, say it little loudly so they can hear, because you don't have a mic on you, okay?
So actually the thing is that there is actually an entire branch of mathematics dedicated to this representation, and it's called measure theory. The thing is that this matrix, whatever space it resides in, or whatever the domain of this F is, that space has to have a measure defined on. There has to be some way of defining a measure on that space. You should be able to measure that space in some way. So for example, in Hilbert spaces that you're used to in quantum mechanics, you have an inner product which is defined. If you don't have an inner product, there must be something else defined that way. This is why you also need to have a complete basis set. Okay, this formula will most likely not work, or will complicate the hell out of itself if you have like an undercomplete or an overcomplete basis that way. And also the thing is, now the measure is defined, which means any representation of this space will work. That's why, as ma'am said, you can even do something like take psi star psi, which are both just complex numbers. Even that will work. You want to represent it as matrices, that will also work. It's just space and its dual space. That's like space and the corresponding area that you want, or the corresponding volume of that space you want in the dual space. That's what you have to multiply. That's what defines the projection into that area. That way. And just a more visual example of this thing, but that thing needs to be defined.
Yeah. So, okay, so maybe I'll just, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but see, there are lots of concepts here that we kind of take for granted. One is measure, okay, we have, and completeness. So, measure is something that you will come across next year when you talk about say relativistic quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, where it appears in the guise of something called gauge, okay. So, you must be able to talk about distance between two objects in a vector space, okay. So, that is a measure that he is talking about. So, whatever you are see now, it is very easy that in my XYZ space, I can say that I am like 2 meters away from you. That is already because I have already put a kind of a dimension, and I have a ruler in all 3 dimensions, and I am able to measure the distance between us. But this becomes a concept that holds even if I have a kind of very abstract vector space. So, this notion of measure is very important, okay.
Matrix space and measure are same, or
So, no, so there will be a measure associated with every vector space, that is proper.
geometric we wrote.
Yeah, see, the metric is, for example, in some nice flat space or Minkowski space, I can associate a metric, but I may not even have a continuous or something. No, this is, for example, you have infinite dimensional spaces, but even in a finite, if I have a set of matrices, no, what is the metric over there, right? But there is still a notion of measure, everything is there. So there are these concepts, and oh, sorry. Sure. Yeah. When I was young and we did not have any devices, we just learned to write fast, okay. I sympathize, you people are not used to writing, I mean. But by the way, mostly what I am doing is from some textbook or the others, I am not going beyond that. I told you this is a very beginning course, I don't want to give you anything extra, or I don't want to confuse you with anything, I mean. Apart from which my knowledge is limited, so I will stick to what I know. So I will make a few remarks now. Oh God, how did I spend so much time? Okay, I think we started late. I will make a few remarks on infinite dimensional vector spaces. mean, think of it this way, suppose I have a 3-dimensional space x, y, z. I can define a polynomial which contains some,
Discrete but
yeah,
infinite.
correct, exactly. So that'll also be a vector space. I mean, so you can, I mean, you have to just like go away from the notion of, my 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional space being my vector space, okay. I can have all kinds of things. In fact, if it was a proper maths course, I think they would start with polynomials as vector spaces rather than, but we are interested more in matrices. We have to come to Pauli matrices, we have to come to, flat space, space time. So our examples are all, or quantum mechanics, psi and psi star. So we are more interested in that kind of thing. But I don't think any mathematician would even start with this kind of bracket. They would start with, yeah, either the real line or some polynomials at best. I mean, they would not do anything beyond that. So
Like the precursor course to this in math is literally real analysis.
yes, yes,
Then real analysis.
yes, yes,
Then there is complex analysis in
correct,
tensor spaces.
yes,
Then they come to this.
correct.
Because all of that needs to be defined before you can.
Yeah, but the thing is that the great thing is that all of you would have done all this in the guise of angular momentum algebra, you see. So that is the great saving grace. And if you ever wondered that, you always thought angular momentum algebra is hard, it is because the concepts there are hard, okay. So it's just taught as a very mechanical derivation, but,
No, we have not done.
oh, you didn't do angular momentum algebra? Huh?
Angular momentum algebra is in
No, I mean, no, in BSc you would have done.
Up to the spherical harmonic stuff and hydrogen atom problem, but the addition of angular momentum we have not done.
But you've come across Pauli matrices, right?
Yes, little bit. In no,
not even a talk about polymer.
Oh my god, okay.
It's okay.
That's
I'll
why
take a remedial class and bring you on up to speed on angular momentum.
Yeah, because without that, I mean, yeah, will you take the class then, Pratik? Give them a class, otherwise, yeah, that will save me the trouble of giving the class. Yeah, please. It's important to understand this. See, as I said, this whole course, we're not giving it as a proper formal math course, right? Somewhere in my mind is the fact that all of you are wanting to be physicists. So lot of times we are hand waving, lot of time we are hiding the details under the rug, and not lot of the times, all the time we are hiding the details under the rug. So please keep that in mind. Okay. So now can I take it all off? So we never think of functions that way, right? Suppose I say f is equal to a plus bx plus cx squared, right? What is the action of f? It just gives you a number, right? For every x, it gives you a number. So you must think of so functions can give you various things, right? So to think of the function itself as having certain properties, right? Probably not something that you kind of thought about a lot. So.
Physicists don't really think about functions in that way beyond class 12. When you have maths.
No, that is not true. I mean,
No, you have relations on sec.
Yeah.
The notion of a function as a subset of relations. That's it. But mathematicians actually go from relations to maps and then to functions. Like more
but
often than
I think
not,
that happens in
mathematicians
MSc,
are
I think.
very wary of calling something a function because it has a very strict definition. More often than not, they'll prefer maps.
No,
More
but
often than not, all of this
that,
is
all that depends on whether you're doing discrete or continuous maths. So in physics, we are assumed that everything is continuous. And then that makes it hard. It makes the maths hard because you can see whatever I'm talking about, it's all finite dimensional spaces, right? The infinite dimensional spaces are hard, but that's what we need in physics, right? And you can think about it. By the way, we know that we have a finite dimensional universe, right? Our universe is 13.71 billion years old, which means that the size of the universe is finite, and therefore why we keep talking about infinite dimensional anything you should think about, but it is very important to be able to think about it. Yes, please think about it. Okay, so I'm not going to do this chapter. I'm just going to make some mentions of what is required. Okay, so this is now infinite dimensional vector spaces. So I'm going to make a very cavalier treatment of this spaces. Okay. So what was our notion of a vector space? Our vector space, the finite dimensional vector space, was something that had some set of bases ei, and I was finite right? And these were orthogonal to each other, right? And normalized. So this is what we had. And what was the meaning of linear independence? That if I have an n-dimensional vector space, any other vector can be written as a linear combination of these basis vectors, right? That's what I had. Now I want to go to infinite dimensional vector space. How would I even build up a basis set for this? So the notion of saying that I have something which is in terms of infinite, in terms of infinite basis set doesn't make sense, right? Suppose I say that, okay, let me start with a 2-dimensional space, then I have some vectors E1 and E2. Then I add a 3rd dimension, I add E3. Then I add a 4th dimension, I add E4. So can I keep going like this and then say that I have an infinite dimensional basis which spans the entire infinite dimensional vector space? Okay. So in general, this is very hard to see. Okay. But there is a lemma. Okay. There is a lemma which says that every infinite dimensional vector space has a basis. So this is a lemma. It's not easy to prove. I have not seen the proof myself. Okay. But this tells you that you can actually find such a basis. You may not be able to enumerate the basis, but the basis exists. Okay. This is the starting point for all infinite dimensional vector spaces. Okay. So what does it mean? So the first question, what does it mean to have the following statement, which is exactly the generalization, or it does not matter 0 or 1. Okay. Because you can see that if I want to find the norm of this, it will be x1 squared plus x2 squared plus x3 squared, and as I keep adding and I keep adding, you can see that the norm might go to infinity, right? And what does it actually mean? So there is some notion called convergence in the vector space, okay? And the way we will implement convergence in the kind of infinite dimensional vector spaces that we are interested in is to talk about square integrability, okay? So that is the only way we will understand, and what we will say is the following, okay? Suppose I consider a function f of x is square integrable over some region, let us say in a to b in x, that is I can write some integral a to b and exists and is finite, right? Then for example, I can define, you remember these are the properties of our vector space, right? Addition, multiplication by scalar, whatever, right? So what will happen to h of x? Will this be square integrable? This will be so what will I have? F squared plus g squared plus, very nice, and therefore we know that because the norms are positive definite, this will be less than or equal to mod f mod g, right? That will be the maximum value, right? It's completely real. So what does this mean? So if this norm must exist, then this norm must exist and this norm must exist, okay? So if f is square integrable and g is square integrable, then h is square integrable, because the norm of this is bounded. See, this less than or equal to is important, right? The norm of h is bounded by this. So if these norms are finite, then so will this be.
But 2fg should also be finite.
No, the norm of f is just f, right? Norm of f is finite. So f square is some finite number, g square is finite number, f and g, and twice f of g is also finite, and this is bounded. This is a lower bound. Sorry, this is an upper bound on h mod squared. So the bound exists, which means that that's also normalizable. Okay, so that means exactly like we had sum over two quantities, and then you can do the same thing. You can scale it by some lambda. So all those properties of vector spaces you can see are going to hold. Now, so as homework you can also try what happens if h of x is equal to f minus g. And you will find that the same thing holds. If f and g are individually square integrable and norm is finite, then so is the norm of h finite. Okay, so you can. Sorry.
If the function is a complex function.
No, I'm just saying if h is f minus g instead of f plus g, then you will still get the same bound. Okay, so it doesn't matter. It's trivial, right? You can see that it's trivial. Okay. And in fact, you can see that whatever we have defined as the norm doesn't depend on these limits. It's just that the function is non-zero within the limits a to b, and the norm is also positive definite. So in fact, I can extend ab to minus infinity to plus infinity, and it will not matter at all. Okay, so that is the first statement. Now, here is maybe I should just make a so now I can define an inner product. Let us take again my f and g. I can define my inner product f comma g as, again, by the way, now I can remove my a to b and make it minus infinity to infinity, and this is f star g dx, right? Inner product, this is also called a scalar product. And if I have an infinite dimensional vector space with a scalar product defined on it with some notions of completeness and convergence, this is what is called a Hilbert space. So I am deliberately leaving it open because there are some definitions I do not want to get into, but if you are curious you can look it up, and this notion of Hilbert space will come again and again in quantum mechanics, and there you will see the implementation. For example, you can take some potential well or some simple example that you have already done in quantum mechanics and try to find out the Hilbert space for that system, and then you will understand what each of those properties mean with respect to a physical example. I would urge all of you to actually do this. Okay, so take an example that you have already done in quantum mechanics, whatever you have done in your coursework, okay, and try to understand what is the Hilbert space with respect to that particular system. Then you will know what it means and what are the kind of assumptions that go into making a Hilbert space. Okay, so what is this? Let us see what this. By the way, all those properties of scalar product hold, right? So what were the properties of scalar product? So lambda f comma g will be lambda star f of g, f of lambda. All this we taught looked at in the first class, right? So it's antilinear in the first component, linear in the second component, and of course this is positive definite. F comma f is the norm, right? So this is and this is positive definite. There is one small notion about this positive definiteness. Okay, which is some kind of something obvious. Suppose I have some function which is, let us say that this is x, and in some interval a b I have this function. So this function f of x is greater than 0 in this region A to B, okay, and not only greater than 0 but it is also continuous. Okay, then the statement is if this is trivial to prove actually, so you do not have to worry about it. Okay, so you can just think if it is not 0 and then immediately you can see because it is continuous you will have a contradiction and so it is 0, right. It is clear, just an aside. Okay. No, this is just because this is a positive definite norm, it can only be 0 or greater than 0, that is all. So if the function is 0 everywhere then the norm is equal to 0, otherwise it is greater than 0, that is all, it is just a small aside. Now let us write some operators over here. So now let us make the connection with say some quantum mechanics or some. So I have some arbitrary vector in my vector space, I can write it as okay, this is what I do and this is my basis set, right. This is my basis which is orthonormal actually. So now I want to go to a continuous function of and because it is a continuous function my dot product let us say phi comma psi is equal to minus infinity to infinity phi star psi dx, right. So this is the infinite dimensional thing, right. They are all completely straightforward. Then I can define the notion of a linear operator, and I do not know which one of the two books I took it from. The linear operator is called H, very suggestive. So if psi is equal to H phi, then I can write this as the component ith component of psi is Hij phi j, and in my continuous x notation I can write this as integral, and there is a reason I called this k rather than h. This you might have seen already in electrostatics. Very nice, okay. And in maths this is called the kernel, which is why it is called k. So in the Green's function you would have seen if I have a charge distribution at x prime, then to find the field or the potential at a point x is exactly this form, right, where this becomes a Green function g of x prime. Okay, then is there any other definition that I can give? And so I can write, I think they can see this board if I squeeze it in. Yeah, I hope you can see this board. Excellent. Eigenvalue equation is h psi is equal to lambda psi, which I will write as k x prime psi of x prime dx prime is equal to lambda psi of x. Okay, so you see that I have just done very, very simple things. I have just like introduced to you yeah, sorry.
Can we say that the k should only be a delta function of x and its prime?
No, that we know, even that is the same as this, right. Some k acts on phi to give you the psi, right.
Only one basis there will be only one basis because it will give the delta
It's like this basis, no? Like let us see this. We had x is equal to lambda x, right? And therefore this has all the xi's in it. This is not diagonal, right? When you transform A so that to the basis where x becomes the unit vector A, then this A transformed, which is transformed through that gamma ei prime, is lambda ei prime. And here only it becomes diagonal, right? So that the transformation which takes x to e prime, which are the basis set which are orthogonal or orthonormal, are the ones which convert A to A tilde, and that is exactly the transformation P inverse AP, right? So that's or that gamma inverse A gamma or whatever we called it, right? So that's the same thing here. So right now this is not necessarily diagonal, it depends. If this is the basis set, then it will be diagonal. If it's not the basis set, it will not be diagonal. Huh.
If you look at it, there is within the integral we have psi of x prime.
Yeah.
On the right hand side we have psi of x.
Yeah.
So can we say that the k function can be a Dirac delta function of x and x prime?
No, that's right. That's exactly what I'm saying here, right? That's exactly the point here. What have I done? No. So here you could write, for example, aij xj. So there is a xj is equal to I, right? This is what it is. Because I'm summing over j. So I hope this can be seen. So ij sum over j. Okay. So that means it says that the ith eigenvector depends on all the j eigenvectors, right? Same way the x, now is a continuous variable, depends on all the x prime psi vectors, right? It's the same thing except it's a continuous variable, right? Only when I transform it into the basis where these are the actual basis vectors, then of course ei and ej are orthogonal to each other, then the left hand side and right hand side will both be ei, right? And then this will be diagonal, this will be the diagonal object, that's the only way this will satisfy, and that is not here yet because psi and psi prime, psi of x and psi of x prime are different objects. These are just spanning the space, right?
No, when we consider the A psi equals to lambda psi equation, so psi is the lower term, there madam,
Here, huh?
At
Huh.
previous in the bottom.
Huh.
When we are considering the operator A psi, so H is a function only operating on x, so in the integration it will operate on H of k, the kernel. So it will have to be the Dirac delta function, means lambda into Dirac delta function.
No.
Here it need not.
No, it need not be. No, this is to be integrated over. Again, let us take psi is a plus bx plus cx squared, right? So this will be a plus bx prime plus cx prime squared. It's something else, right? It need not be the Dirac delta function. Then something else multiplying it will give me some other, huh? Sorry?
That is phi only, psi non. In the integration there is psi or phi. It's phi and
This is the eigenvalue equation. Eigenvalue equation.
Excuse me, ma'am. Just a doubt.
Yeah.
So when we write the definition of Dirac delta function,
Uh.
it is integral delta function x minus x prime,
Hmm.
some any function of x prime, let us say, integrate over dx. So that gives us the function's value at x.
Yeah, but this is an eigenvalue equation. This is lambda times psi, right? And this has n solutions of lambda because lambda is not a single number, right? There are n lambdas. How many there are? How many eigenvalues? It's an infinite dimensional space, right? This is not a trivial equation. Please understand this, no? Because we have written it schematically as lambda, right? That is true, yeah. That is a different matter. But here, just look at this, right? Look at this, by the way. So maybe this will help. Okay. So each lambda is different, right? So each lambda will be different. So for every solution set, I will have a different lambda, right? See, look at it. Let's take A to be a 3 by 3 matrix. Then I expect 3 lambdas, right? So so if this is a 3 by 3 matrix, I know that the basis vector is 3 by 3. So I have E1, E2, E3. So I'll have A tilde E1 is lambda 1 E1, A tilde E2 is lambda 2 E2, and A tilde E3 is lambda 3 E3, right? So eigenvalue equation is a schematic thing. It has many, you know that you're going to get many solutions, right? When you write determinant A minus lambda equal to 0, then you have so many lambdas as the solution, right? It's not a single thing. It's just that we know what we mean, right? So when we write that equation, so when I write this equation, it is not a single lambda, no, there are many solutions lambda.
And then the psi here is an infinite dimensional vector.
Yes.
How would we able to write it as summation finite as a finite summation?
That's what I said, this finite summation we will just then move into
Infinite.
this, right? So all our notion, that's all I'm saying is that there's a way of building this up. All I'm doing is I'm doing by inspection. I've taught you about finite dimensional spaces. Now I'm just by extrapolation, which is a little dangerous because there are certain subtleties. I can write, for example, an inner product, but instead of the inner product being just some overlap function, I'm having an infinite integral over here. Again, a linear operator, I have an integral function over here. So I can define everything just as I defined for the finite dimensional vector space. So the main thing is that, which I kind of, it's called, I think, Zorn lemma or John lemma, I forget, I think it's called Zorn's lemma, that you have a basis, okay, for infinite dimensional vector space. That gentleman has proved it, and we are all happy with his proof. So we simply accept it and we say, yes, I can make a basis set for an infinite dimensional vector space. That gets rid of the basis, but the thing is, I may not be able to enumerate that basis. You see, I have not actually worked with that basis, okay, but I can always just make a definition of an inner product. So this is a definition of an inner product. So I didn't need to use the explicit basis vectors to define my inner product, okay. I just define phi and a psi notionally, and then I can write this inner product. And once I have that inner product, and that will actually lead to my measure also, which I am not going to talk about, and there is some notion of completeness. See, I'll tell you what the problem is, okay. Suppose I have one vector space 3-dimensional, I can map it onto another vector space 3-dimensional, right. For example, x, y, z, I can map into r, theta, phi. This is my favorite example, right. What do I do with an infinite dimensional vector space? Okay, let us say that I have some reals on one side and maybe I have say integers on the other side. I can still have a one-to-one mapping because they are both infinite dimensional vector spaces, right? But one is actually a proper subset of the other. So I get all these kinds of problems. So these mappings, in fact the maps that he talked about, that's what the mathematicians will find, a lot of things go wrong in infinite dimensional vector spaces, okay. This notion of, I don't know, one-to-one correspondence, bijection, all that, there are, but you can have a bijection from some space to a smaller proper subspace of that space. So mathematicians find these horrible and they don't like to talk about it, and in fact they will do an entire semester on infinite dimensional vector space. Yeah.
Ma'am just mentioned that you can have a connection, you can have a proper bijective map between a space and its subspace.
Yeah.
That thing is actually explained really well in something called
Right.
the Banach-Tarski paradox.
Write it down so that those people can hear. I mean, I can also write it down, but you can write it down. I will take a break.
It's illustrated extremely well in this, and there's a video on a YouTube channel called Vsauce. I'm mentioning this because this guy, he doesn't do it extremely well, but he gives an extremely good notion of what this is supposed to be and how this actually comes. Like the actual paradox is really hard to comprehend mathematically because we're not mathematicians, and it will actually take us a lot of time to actually read through the entire thing and understand what that actually means. But this video actually explains it visually. The idea is, what if you take a sphere? Can you take all the points in the sphere and a bijective mapping so that the space of this sphere, which is now infinite dimensional because the surface of the sphere contains an infinite number of points, if you have a bijective mapping, you can somehow actually magically decompose the sphere and then recompose it into two spheres identical of the same size as the original sphere. You can duplicate a sphere out of nothing, because of this paradox.
As it is an infinite point.
Yeah, the problem is that it's an infinite dimensional vector space. That's why this kind of thing starts to happen. Nope, it's a paradox. if it's resolved, it can't be a paradox anymore. Right?
Paradox is
Sometimes
different
Yeah.
viewpoint
appear
on
to be
Yeah, but yeah, for example, all of relativity, all the
Yes.
paradoxes are resolved. Yes, that is
we
true.
have seen different
Yeah.
So we can't really say
Yeah.
that they're paradoxes.
Yeah,
This is
yeah, but
actually
the point being that in a sphere, if you want to map the sphere into a sphere, it's a different point. But if you want to map the sphere into a plane, you have to remove one point from it. Otherwise, you will not be able to map it. So usually you say that you remove the north pole, then my sphere is exactly the surface of my sphere is like a plane. Then I can kind of stretch it out into a flat space, right? So there are many of these things, but let me not go there. As I said, we will see linear vector spaces in your quantum mechanics course all the time with infinite dimensional vector spaces, right? And I just want you to appreciate that these are extremely complicated objects for mathematicians. We don't care, okay, because the key point, and as I said that Mr. Zorn, who kind of solved the problem for us, said there is a basis. Okay, we may not be able to enumerate it, but there is a basis, and once there is a basis, and once I can therefore define an inner product or a scalar product, and we do this all the time. Your psi star psi you have been doing, maybe now I don't know the way things are progressing, maybe even in 12th standard you write such things, God knows, but you know this thing forever, and you have to ask how can you talk about psi star phi being orthogonal to each other. When you say something is orthogonal to each other, somewhere there is a basis and they project onto orthogonal elements in that space, right? So there must be a basis. So we never thought about such things. When we say that I can have two vectors which are orthogonal to each other, orthonormal to each other, there is the notion, or somewhere in the back of your mind, the notion that there is a set of basis vectors which are orthogonal to each other. And the mathematicians puzzle a lot about how to actually do this for infinite dimensional vector spaces, but we say that it can be done and then we move on from there, okay. So once we move on from there, we have a notion of a scalar product, and we have seen that this norm is positive, well, it's called positive semi-definite, it's not negative, non-negative object greater than or equal to 0. So if this is psi and this is psi, then this will be if greater than or equal to 0. Then I can have the notion of linear operator in this linear vector space, and that functions exactly like the phi linear operator that I talked about in the finite dimensional vector space, and therefore I can also therefore write an eigenvalue equation which is actually a variation on the linear operator. So that's all I want to say about linear vector spaces which are infinite dimensional. So mathematically they are very different beasts. As I said, I can write the numbers 1, 2 to infinity. I can write 1, 2, 3 to infinity, and then I can write some, say, I don't even know how to write, and then I can map them all. Why even this? I can write 0 point and 1, 1, 5. Why not? I can map this to this, and there's still a one-to-one mapping because there are infinite number of this and there are infinite number of this. But you can see that this is actually a subset of this, right? This is a subset of this. So such funny things happen because then the notion of what is an infinite dimension, countable infinity, uncountable infinity, all those notions come in. But as I said, for us still we will think about these quantities as well behaved quantities, and the kind of operations that we will talk about them, which will come towards the later part of the class, will be to do things like Fourier transforms, Laplace transforms. All those things are actually linear operators on these vector spaces, okay, and that's the interest that we have in them. That is exactly what we want to do. You take a oscillator problem and then you can write nice Fourier space example, and it will have a single eigenvalue, right? 1 omega will be the solution, right? So those are the kinds of things that we will be interested in, and we will come back to that later, okay. But for now, that 15 minutes that I wanted to talk about, I think we have done with. So from next class onwards, we will do differential equations, okay. I am done with vector spaces. Yeah.
Why we every time in quantum mechanics choose the weight function 1? In mathematics, the polynomials we have to weight function in scalar product define weight function.
Choose one. What do you mean by one?
Weight function in scalar product. Every time size.
What do you want to do? What do you want to choose?
Yes, no, we define an inner product in a vector space.
Yeah.
So
This is the definition of inner product, right?
But in polynomials, so we define a weight function W of x, which is different in different vector space. I mean the Legendre polynomials and as it is different.
Okay.
And Harvard polynomials, it is all every time it is different. So why it is in the quantum in they are the one only white function.
No, that will come. No, I mean many of these things appear in the solutions to your quantum mechanics problems, right?
Yes.
I mean your hydrogen atom itself would have given you all kinds of polynomials, right?
Yes.
So
We have to define the
it depends on what is the differential equation and how you solve it, right? The weight function only comes from writing the structure of the differential equation, right? So yeah, if you have Hermite, then you will get certain weight function. If you have, Legendre, you will get some other weight function. So it automatically comes out of the problem, right? For example, your these angular polynomials, right? If you write I mean, I hope you would have seen that in. No, I'm not even talking about differential equations. When you write 1 by mod x minus x prime in electrostatics, your potential, vector potential, right? Then what you will write this in terms of the YLM theta phi, right? Or I don't know if you've seen PL cos theta times e to the IM phi, right? This is what you would have got. So these are your spherical harmonics, right? So these also come out of your physics problems, right? So this is simply the dot product of x and x prime. That's all you are expanding. If the dot product of x and x prime is in the, so let us say that this is x. Let us say that this is x prime in the z direction, and this is, let us say, the x axis, and let us say this is the z axis, and let us say that x is in the xz plane. So this will be theta phi is equal to 0. Okay. Then you will only get PL cos theta as the answer. That's exactly the dot product of x and x, because that's all this is, right? This is mod of x minus x prime squared, which is x squared plus x prime squared minus 2 mod x prime cos theta, and that is what is going to give you this PL cos theta. Whereas if this is not in the xy plane, but it is in some, let us write, so then let us write x, y, z as a proper system, and then your x is in some arbitrary theta x phi x, then you will also get e to the IM phi. That's all. So these come out of your physical problems, no, the properties of your system that you are actually studying. So all these are just solutions which are coming naturally out of your. So the differential equations were written long ago, by some mathematicians, but the ones that keep on finding application in physics, yeah, so that those will have certain weight functions because the differential equation has that form, right? And in fact, we will see a lot of special functions until you're tired of them. Okay, yeah. So what we'll do is that we'll do ordinary differential equations, and these two will be the portions for your midsem exam. Okay.